So needless to say, Logan, this is my first official live ever on
Dude,
TikTok. And I was
I'm hon
not imagining it would be such a hidden way to get here, but here I am. Thank you for your patience and everyone out there listening. Thank you.
oh, dude, I'm honored. I'm excited to talk to you. Do you prefer Nicole, Doctor LaPera? What?
Nicole is great. Nicole is great.
Cool. I like the mother's tongue behind you. Is that the plant?
Is that what it's called? I
I
call it
think so.
perhaps, maybe. We have two. We just actually spruced up our set over here, so now it has plant life in it, and it feels much more cozy as a result.
Well, cool. Where are you located geographically speaking?
I am currently in Scottsdale, Arizona. We just moved here last July. So
Okay.
just in, love it here, thrilled to be here.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. I always see the cool succulents and cacti going on in your background.
I know there's a lot of plant life here. I don't think I was anticipating it before I moved, how much outside of just cactuses, lots of plant life, all abounding.
Totally. Totally. So, what what do you want to talk about? I mean, per- personally, I just I wanted to get to know you a little bit more. I'm honored to get to talk to you. Actually I'm a little nervous. Um, the, but I was told my wife tonight. I was like, hey, I'm talking to yeah, Dr. Nicole Perla, like the holistic psychologist. And she's like, are you serious? I've been following her for years. I was like, you're going to make me nervous. Stop. Stop.
Well, that
um,
means so much to both of you. I'm happy you've been following along. And I've been such a big fan. I just got onto TikTok fairly recently within the past couple months. And I very much thank my Explore page. Somehow your page and your work crossed my path. And I've been very excited ever since. I love what you're sharing, what you're doing, what you're teaching. So I'm pretty excited to be connecting with you too, Logan.
that's awesome. Thank you. Thank you. How, I mean, as another therapist, I'm always just curious, like, why did you become a therapist?
Big that the big question, right? The big
Yeah,
question.
right. We know it's not for the paycheck at the beginning. We're all grinding in community mental health and trying to hold on to
I
sanity.
Right, right. So, I mean, for me, as long as I can remember, I think the best way I describe it is kind of one of those intuitive pings, but I never would have used that word. I was a diehard scientist. There was no such thing as intuition. If it wasn't facts and figures, it was not of interest to me, though
Sure.
retrospectively, I very much understand that's what it was for a very long time. And how it kind of expressed itself for me was, in adolescence, when you pick up books and things like that, I was really, really interested in understanding other humans in particular. By this point, I'd started to gather friends and I was always really, curious about what made people, similar to me in terms of their way of being in the world, and of course, what made people, not like me. So as long as I can remember, I think I was always seeking to understand. I think, as you know, all roads lead back to, our own questions, our own inquiries. So I think on that
Sure.
deep level, I was likely seeking to understand myself. But for me, it came out of like it came out in terms of like I want to know other people, and ultimately, if I can, I want to then be able to help other people. So as long as I can remember, that was the case for me. And I remember my high school actually offered one psychology class, and you couldn't take it until senior year. It was your elective. And I
Yeah, yeah,
waited for all of those, those 4 years to take this one class because while I was very good at school, I very much was an overachiever. I was pushed to get good grades, to get into the good college and so forth.
sure.
In terms of interest in school, I really was interested in psychology. So by the time senior year came, I jumped into that class, kind of affirmed that for me, that was going to be the path I would take. And one of those people who even entered my undergrad as a declared psychology major, very much knowing that I would probably pursue up until the PhD, because at that time, the only way in the state that I lived in Pennsylvania, the only way that you could practice was to have a clinical licensure. And that's really what I was interested in, getting to know people, getting to understand people, and of course, being in
Sure.
the room with people. So I pretty much just put my head down and went from, undergrad into graduate school, and then ended up opening a practice. And had a fairly, kind of successful practice really quickly in Philly. And this is actually what created a shift for me in terms of working the way I do now. A couple years in, really only a handful of years in, Logan. So here I am, right? I had all this interest in helping people. I went to all this school to help people. I learned all of these different modalities or ways in which to work with people. And then I had
Sure.
my practice, and before long, I was starting to feel so disempowered, so unable to actually be of help to the people that I was in the room with. And on the personal side of things, as someone who experienced anxiety for as long as I can remember, I was actually just in a
Right.
workshop at the Circle. As someone who experienced anxiety for as long as I can remember, I was actually just in a
Right.
workshop at the Circle earlier this morning, sharing about how I was literally the little girl scared of the world, hiding from strangers, always worried that something bad was going to happen to myself or my family. So I know
Totally.
that side of the couch very well. And so on the personal side of things, not only was I struggling to be a effective clinician in the room, I was really struggling to be effective in my own life. I had all of this, I checked all of the boxes. I was in a relationship. I was in a city that I wanted to live in, and yet inside I was just feeling so unfulfilled, I think, and disconnected would be the two words that came to mind. And so for me, this lifelong drive to do this thing, and now I'm living it and having that mismatch in how I thought I would feel and how I felt, and how much I wasn't really even able to maintain changes in my life, really sent me first on a kind of a path of knowledge gaining, of trying to understand what the hell was happening. Why was I struggling
Sure.
as I was, and why were my
Hit a bit of
clients?
an
And
existential crisis, I'd imagine. Like, what the
yeah,
hell
very
am I
much. I
doing?
think using language that probably a lot of your followers are familiar with, I had, kind of that spiritual, dark night of the soul place where I was screaming out. I was feeling disconnected and unfulfilled because I was disconnected from that deeper sense of who I was.
Yeah. And I appreciate you sharing that trajectory, and I think it's really helpful. Like I have a lot of counselors and therapists that follow me, that follow this page as well, and I think hearing other established, well-known practitioners talking about a couple years into starting my practice, that's really like most of our dream of when we've made it, when we've come up, is when we hang our sign and open our doors and have our little website, and um, unless our sense of personal meaning is satisfied, unless our sense of personal meaning is satisfied in how the rubber is meeting the road every day, it's it all still feels empty. And I really appreciate you sharing your story about how that happened for you.
Yeah, and it the how the rubber was hitting the road for me, um, to be silly about it, it wasn't, because what I came to realize is that, even my focus point of like getting through school, really achievement driven, for me was very much a very praised, validated in a lot of ways, distraction, right, from that inner kind of sense of who I was. So while I was going through the
Yeah,
motions very much, and like I said, checking all these boxes and, kind of getting all of this external validation, like I had my shingle up, I had the
totally.
caseload that was full, and
Did
but
all
what
the
I
things
didn't have,
Joneses check.
I
Like,
did it
yeah,
all, and but I wasn't doing it in an embodied way, right? Like I wasn't fully. What I came to realize is how not present I was really for the large entirety of my life. Because if we really want to go back to it, that little girl afraid of the world was a very adaptive little girl who figured out, not only through achievement, but figured out how to keep myself safe in a very overwhelming family environment with a lot of consistent health issues, a lack of emotional attunement and support, because all of the adults around me were focused on the next fire that we had to put out. Um, what I came to realize is that little adaptive girl learned how to check out and learned how to, kind of put her attention on everything outside of herself. Not only just achievement, but I began to see that same patterning of disconnection in my relationships where and I had this really pivotal moment I like to share about, because I was a person who, was always worried about the world around me. And because I think a lot of us can resonate with this, if we feel like we're, a highly sensitive person or an empathetic person, and I believe all of us humans are on that scale. We all can sense energies,
That's
right?
part of our life. That's what we're
It's
supposed to
part
be
of
here.
who we
Yeah,
are, and that's
yeah.
our ultimate journey here, though. When that happens, I think sometimes we kind of overstep us. And what I mean by that is I went about the world worrying about the world, what I thought was worrying about the world, worrying about upsetting people, worrying about showing up as this partner or loved one or friend or who professional that I wanted to be. And what I didn't realize was that I wasn't really ever checking in with myself. I wasn't really ever connected to what it was that I might have wanted or needed in that moment. I got so good, or so I thought, at tuning to and worrying about everyone around me, that I actually just removed myself from the equation entirely. So again,
Sure.
this kind of disconnection, I was seeing all of these different layers of it in my
Mhm.
life, and I was suffering because of it. So not only in my relationships I wasn't feeling connected and fulfilled, physically at that point, because I had so much, stress locked up in my body. Because just because we're not paying attention to it doesn't mean it's not there. That in terms of exhaustion and burnout, I see these words and these concepts being talked
Mhm.
about, and I mean, that was very much a lived experience. My body was, kind of breaking down, shutting down, because even though I was on my spaceship disconnected from all of the stress and trauma in my body, it didn't mean that my body was disconnected from it. It was very, very
Oh,
much there. And that's kind of when everything came crumbling, was, I think, like for a lot of us, the moment to really begin to look at things and to begin to ask the questions of, why am I feeling the way that I'm feeling? And is there something deeper going on that I can understand? And then obviously begin to shift and make some changes around.
yeah. No, it's that's I appreciate that. Um, I think so many folks look at us mental health professionals or folks who are in more public spaces talking about mental health and must assume that we don't ever deal with stuff or have had our own stuff. And actually, uh, I tend to find that folks who try to do this work that haven't been through stuff um, have a very difficult time understanding more depth-oriented processes. And the most powerful healers are wounded healers. I'm kind of in line with what you're talking about with intuition and emotional resonance just being a natural aspect to humanity. A way that I tend to talk about it is like emotions are like notes of music on a scale, and like we're all just playing music with each other all day.
Mhm,
And before we developed all this cool verbal expression stuff, that's really only uh, um, the full range of capability that we can express is really on comparable to avians, like birds that can do insane stuff with their vocal. Like we are designed to communicate with each other, and that was all happening pre-verbal, like, before, and
mhm,
just through body language and grunts or whatever we were doing to let each other know
mhm,
what the vibe was and how we needed to move as a village. And when we have woundedness and the hypervigilance gets connected to the empathy and we learn to dissociate from ourselves, if we can harness that and put it in a bottle and save it for wounded healer time and keep
mhm.
ourselves healthy enough to have good fruit, and all realize that trauma is endemic to modern society now, I think we can be a globally connected society. I think we can redefine the human race again.
I could not agree more. I was actually listening to, when you talk about body, I was listening to one of your videos about, epigenetics. And for me, that was, as I call it, it was, didn't fling my door wide open of knowledge and, self-awareness. It just cracked it a little bit because I was so conditioned in what I was taught in school and really what I saw in my family, which is this idea that, of genetic determinism, is of that we don't actually have choice or control. Whatever the DNA that we're born with at birth, that's just going to express itself no matter what.
Sure.
And I
It's
think
what we're
not
taught in
only
school. Mhm.
right? Not only are we taught that in school, but a lot of us see that in our families. I saw the same anxiety present in my mom and my sister. I saw even the same personality traits. And of course, I'm doing
Yeah,
the
so
ears
all
here
our
because
it's all our
all of that is an adaptation,
yeah,
right? In my
all
opinion.
very true.
And yes, it does come into
Yeah.
families. I'm seeing someone in the comments right here. It's not a fault. It just is. Their mothers were traumatized and it got passed down. Absolutely. And this is why so many of us see these personality traits or whatever issue it is, physical or psychological, emotional, we see it running in our families again because of the environment our environment goes way back to being in utero, right? And that genetic environment and all of the stress hormones that we were exposed to then. So for me, when I first heard about this concept of epigenetics, back when I was having my breakdown, I was like, this is interesting. But there was a very deep rooted belief in me that was rolling its eyes and was saying, okay, all these stories are great for all of these people
All
who
right,
are,
Dr. Joe Dispenza.
changing their life and Joe
Yeah, yeah,
Dispenza, and oh, you've healed yourself of this, almost debilitating injury, like inspiring, but I sanction myself off. That's for you. And I'm still beholden to my genetics and I can't create change. However, really realizing, how powerful those choices that we're making are. And on the flip side of it, how powerful the fact that we were raised by other humans who were raised by humans that were conditioned in the same ways they were, and furthermore, whose genes might have been impacted. So while we might be born into an environment internal in terms of our own genetics and external, right, that is challenging, that is maybe really stress filled, we actually can, talking about the body, right? And this is why I
mhm,
even call myself the holistic psychologist now. We actually
sure.
can create change, and that change happens when when we incorporate our body. And the body, I can't even remember. I'm trying to think back to when I was in school, in what context the body, like below the neck, was even really, offered. And it was really minimal. It was definitely not, as
Ah,
far as I say it, foundational. The
sure,
body is in my opinion foundationally important to
absolutely.
creating change, because to speak to your point, a lot of us, have a nervous system that's dysregulated, have epigenetic changes that have been passed on to us that are changing the way our body functions. And because
Mhm.
our body is connected to our mind and is
Sure,
communicating with our brain, the
sure.
dysfunction or dysregulation or imbalance in our body is going to continue to keep us then locked in this cycle, because it's going to just communicate. So, for my instance, if I have a stressed out body, it's going to communicate to my mind that there's a threat at hand. And it's only before long that I'm either hyper vigilant to my environment, trying to figure out when the next shoe is going to drop, right?
Mhm.
Or my mind is racing. And I had both of those experiences. So until I really understood that my body was playing a role, that all of this stuff did come from somewhere, though now I had a choice. I could begin to change my relationship with my body. And to speak to your point, a lot of us are living in bodies and environments and cultures and societies. I grew up my whole life in a city. I mean, I can go on and on about how dysregulating
Where
city
did you
life
grow up?
in
Where did you grow up?
Philadelphia. I grew
Okay,
up
in
in
Philly?
Philadelphia, and then I
Okay,
did I probably spent a decade in my 20s in New York City. Before then I
okay.
moved to LA really quickly. So this is my first time not really in city
Being in the
life.
city.
And so to speak to your point, a lot of us are living as humans in general in
Got
unnatural environments and environments that are creating a lot of stress in our bodies. And if we're not aware of it, we're going to continue to think it's something wrong with us. It's the genetics that I was born with. I'm going to
it.
have it forever because I can't create change. And that's why, again,
Mhm.
I'm so impassioned about, yes, raise your vibe 111. We have a choice. And that's part of the reason why I do the work that I do. And I love seeing people like yourself do the work that you do, is just this daily reminder, not only that we have a choice, but of what practical choices we can begin to make to create, in my opinion, I mean, extensive change in our life.
Absolutely. And, I remember, so this being tuned in to how powerful, kind of how I consider what we're talking about here is, just kind of reclaiming your central nervous system in daily intentional living. Um, and I grew up in downtown Atlanta, in the '90s, which was like super fun for hip hop, and there was just like a lot of stuff going on. and was a young wild child. I started creating content after I had news. At that time, my sixth childhood friend died from an overdose, and started creating media online to try to connect with more people around this stuff. Um, but when, as a young rough kid running with those people who, half of them didn't make it, um, it is, people don't even realize how, on autopilot and just running back and forth between hyper arousal and hypo arousal we are, just kind of go 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 go
Mhm,
go, coffee, caffeine, amphetamines, and then roll into sedatives or alcohol or melatonin or whatever it is
mhm,
at night, Ambien, to shut it all
mhm,
down. And it keeps people so sick. In my early 20s, I went to school at the University of Georgia in Athens, and it was super fun. Um, it did nothing for my developing addiction, alcoholism stuff to help that at all. And I was getting pretty out of control early 20s. And after undergraduate school, went to go work in the woods with at-risk youth. Spent like 3 years in the Appalachian mountains, like, no electricity setting. And it wasn't like a brat camp type thing where like they steal kids at
mhm, mhm.
night in vans.
Literally.
Yeah, totally. This was kids coming out of youth detention centers and stepping out of psychiatric residential inpatient units. It was I think it's called like a level 3 residential program in the community mental health space. And I was coming in, I was attracted to the work because I was also fascinated with studying psychology. I wanted more applicable spaces. I wasn't ready to go right into graduate level training. I needed a break, and the alcoholism was out of control. So I was going to go pop off the grid for a while. And being in that space with young people, I, I also grew up in a family that was pretty chaotic, and there were adults with untreated mental health stuff and addiction stuff, um, using, available kiddos around as punching bags, that, got to be one of, and was very well versed at turning myself off and taking care of whatever symptomatic adult was in the room, as is very typical of children in alcoholic families. Um, and so kind of stepped into that space and being a bit of an overachiever and knowing how to do that, and really vibing with these young kids as well. Like at that age, I was 22. The oldest ones were 17. A lot of them were 14, 15. I was kind of like running with their older brothers not too long before that. Right? So like felt like I
Mhm,
like got them, they got me. And I, developed relationships with them, cared about them, and kind of lost myself in service to them. And on the other side, discovered that I not only love the work, but this daily life built in goal setting and group dynamics. And this is my part, and this is how it all fits together. And this is how we're making meaning before lunch. And working mindfulness into sweeping the floor of the cabin and appreciating my little 5 to 7 minutes before I woke the boys up, knowing that the next 12 to 14 hours are going to be insane. And that's like really how I discovered building those mindfulness practices into each of those little moments, just being gracious for 5 to 10 minutes to take care of my own space before insanity. And over time, um, kind of came of age in that wilderness setting myself, and ended up falling in love with doing the work. And at some point saw an older sibling come through of a younger brother that I'd worked with for a while. And I'm an older brother as well. And I was just like, I got more curious where they were coming from. So that's what I went and studied after that. But no, absolutely. If we don't know, we don't know. I had to go disappear in the woods.
absolutely, absolutely, and it's interesting because when I was training in New York, I was somewhere in the middle of my graduate program, and I walked by I think it was a museum, and there was a quote painted on the side of the museum, and it's something to do with life being lived in moments. And I started to play this idea of moment and, being present to a moment in my head. And I went back to my computer at work and I Googled it, and I pinged on mindfulness. And this was the first time I was in my early 20s I'd ever even seen this concept. And I started to get, when I read what mindfulness is, oh, present awareness, right, being here. I was like, really resonating with it. At the same time, I was also in the substance abuse track in my program, so I was running groups in an outpatient rehab, and I was very much, kind of resonating with that world and working with
Sure.
people overcoming addictions. And so I started to think about, right, how this idea of presence and it all comes together. And it really, at that point though, for me, was just an idea. It was a concept. I didn't really
Sure.
do much with it outside of that. I probably got distracted back in school and wrote my dissertation. And though it was
Yeah.
always kind of there under the surface, and then as I, began to explore myself and my own journey, and like I said, kind of really opening myself up to questioning and wondering why, here comes this concept again, this idea of consciousness. And at that point, really for me, it went from an idea into an action. Because by that point, I had really, witnessed all of the different ways that I was so disconnected. And I really began to understand how this action of being present to yourself, like you're saying, those couple minutes where I'm, just sweeping the floor or just being in my own presence, I began to really then practice that. And I think about this a lot because in really a lot of the content that I share, things are concepts, right? We can read a lot about them. Ego is one of the first things that comes to mind, and maybe people have even read full books on like what is this concept. And it for all of us, I'll go as far to say, is until they become an embodied action, and especially with something so foundational like being present, being in your own presence, and how disconnected so many of us are. That's such an integral part. I think a lot about the reason why so many of us are stuck, and that's the word that I think came up most frequently in my sessions with my older clients was, I'm stuck. I'm stuck. I can't change. I have all this insight, yet I can't do it differently. And it really, again, let's talk about, here comes the body piece again. Until I embody these practices, until I do or use these concepts in action, that's why we keep being stuck. And so it's so cool to kind of look back and see how all these pieces fit together, and how, things were just, pieces of information that then began to be integrated into my life. And for a lot of us, that might be a lifetime journey, right? Really coming to awareness of how to, view yourself consciously, how to see your ego and all of these other concepts that we talk about in action, because it's kind of building that bridge from theory, from thought, from the thinking mind into the body and the visceral
Sure.
experience of living consciously in a body, which, is does have a range of emotions, right? They are pings and signals and things that happen inside of us that are very uncomfortable.
It's
And that,
hard.
right. And that
And
is the
it's like
journey
hard.
of
Totally.
being human in so many ways. And so I think, and teach and integrate in my life all of the work of, and when, I wrote a book and we are thinking about titles, and the title that came to mind, was How to Do the Work. And I think that's just such a living embodiment of the practice of making change happen. Because for a lot of us, we just stay stuck in our mind, right? We might even
Totally.
know the path forward. We might have lived the same consequences of the same actions time and time again, that we know we want to do something differently next time, yet we just can't do it differently because the embodiment of something new is threatening, is challenging to our subconscious mind. And for a lot of
Mhm.
us, if that means dropping into a body that was once not safe for whatever reason, because of what happened to it physically or because of the emotional overwhelm, we have a whole lot big reason why not, and why there is uncomfortable stuff stuck in there. Whole big reason why to stay disconnected, right, from ourselves. So when we talk about healing, and I even just love your handle, healing humanity. I think what we're really talking about is turning, all of these ideas into daily actions that I truly do believe unify us. Like you even beautifully described, working with the group, learning, teaching us all how to be part of a cooperative whole of individuals, because that's what I think humanity is at our core. We're based in love, we're based in cooperation. We actually do want what's best for all of us if we can have it around us. And anytime we're operating outside of that, and we're kind of, holding on to our resources, or we're being, critical of someone else, or all of the ways that we separate ourselves.
Healthy choices, dive bomb.
Right, I truly
Yeah,
believe that that's coming from wounding. It's not coming from an
absolutely.
intentional place. For some of us, it might have been the only thing we've practiced, and that's the only thing that
Mhm.
keeps us safe, is keeping ourselves separate. But
Yeah.
and when we come home to ourselves, and that's why I'm so inspired by the work that you do, because we are resonant in that we do come home to the self that is, I believe, all of us in humanity.
Right. We're all just walking each other home, right?
We're all just walking each other home.
Das would say. Um, yeah, the in what talking about it, I think psychology as a whole, and maybe even Western civilization as a whole, it might even be socially and culturally endemic as we're talking about it, is so wrapped up in the mind,
Mhm.
as thinking about the mind as CPU, as the driver of everything. Right, and like Rene Descartes got so wrapped up in the duality and like separating body and mind entirely as part of the scientific revolution has been so foundational to how we understand science and psychology is within that thinking field. It came from there. So we're bound by some of those rules, but inherently, all animals learn through experience. That's that's in order to change, in order to grow, in order to develop, we have to have new experiences for Hebbian learning to take place, for those old neurons to get weeded out and new little connections to have a chance to fire. Um, and that is inherently uncomfortable. The process of developing an acquired taste for it, and learning to appreciate the small moments, and making sure that that the juice is worth the squeeze for us. I think a lot of people are trying to do the work for other people, or for reasons that have nothing to do with them, and have no idea. Uh, One of the first areas that I find myself talking to people a lot about, something to talk about on this page a good bit, is relationships, and navigating tension, kind of when to double down on a bet, and when to be done, and let it ride. um and I think we're really going through a massive shift as the human race. Is we're all now globally connected. We had some biological stuff that we all went through. Now technologically, we're figuring out how to do this all together and can connect all places of the world. Soon enough, crypto is going to make corporate banking somewhat obsolete. We'll have people in much more remote areas making moves because they happen to have resources, and that's cool because that's what needs to happen. um, and if we can't learn how to start putting past some of these isolated, I call them isolated farming community mentalities behind, we're really stuck. And I really like hearing you talk about the some of the more feminine caretaker versions, where people get stuck in modern society. Traditionally yin trained, what we're taught little girls and little boys are supposed to be doing. Um, and coming from a position where, being familiar with how that works for the female experience, and the divine feminine, however, also just wearing a man meat suit and having no idea what that first person experience
Mhm.
is. But working with a lot of men who have trauma stuff going on, because I just happen to be a masculine presenting dude in that field. So they're like, oh, like, oh, I can talk to you, I guess. And um, I think there is so much similarity that men and women assume is not there. The amount of us that grew up with child emotional neglect, that have no idea, that are operating and running on fumes with people pleasing and overachieving, and making the Joneses happy, and then being confused why we don't know ourselves and can't get connected to ourselves or connected to each other. Um, when we know what we're about, and we've sifted out the social and cultural expectations, and we've sifted out the family of origin narratives, and we can dial into what actually meets our personal integrity and how we can maximize being passionate about what we're passionate about and being all in with however we're going to be spending our minutes of that day, we can meet the people who are right for us along that path. And sifting all those pieces out is the healing work. Those are the experiences. And I think so many people, and again, like this Western culture, it's not done or it's done. And when it's done, you'll know it because it'll click. It's folks, that's not how this is gonna work. And Benjamin Franklin a long time said ago, like one long ago said one time, um, when we're done learning, we're done. But I think learning is the same thing as healing. It's what organized religions would have called seeking truth, is orienting yourself to your light. It's all the same thing,
Yeah,
and it's a lifelong process.
yeah. And I think to speak to your point, where some of us are looking for that click, right, or that affirmation is right. We're looking for our like oftentimes the most probably the most frequent question I get is, where's my intuition? How do I know when it's my intuition talking versus everything else, right? And my first response to that is, well, where are you looking? Because I think a lot of us are looking one of two places, right? We're looking in our thinking mind for our intuition to be like the voice that narrates our life all day long, which I assure you is not our intuition at all. Um, or again, we're looking outside of ourselves, right? For a relationship to shift or change. We're looking to get something reflected back or some sort of validation or affirmation from
Sure.
something outside of ourselves. And we're not actually looking where, in my opinion, right, intuition comes from, which is an inner knowing, right? It's an inner guidance system and it's being so connected. So especially when we're talking about, well, how can I, it even come full circle with this conversation. Here you heard me describing I'm disconnected from my relationships. I'm not satisfied. I'm not fulfilled, right? I did look at the reason for a while. I assigned the reason to be my partners I was picking. So if only I pick the right partner, then I will feel differently, not to
Why am I
realize,
attracting toxic people?
right, that I was the person, right, who was so disconnected from myself that there was only a level of emotional intimacy that I could, have with these humans around me, because the truth of the matter was I wasn't connected to my intuition. I wasn't connected to myself. I didn't actually know myself at all. And that moment was made pivotal for me when I was talking to a friend. I started to tell the story earlier, and I was stressed out because everyone needed something different of me and I was feeling pulled in a million different directions. And my friend very calmly just looked at me after she listened to me, vent about all of it. And I was looking for advice, of course. And she said to me, the question was, well, what do you want to do? Right. Because I just told her a litany of 5 people in my life and what they wanted me to do.
Sure,
What do
sure.
you want to do? And Logan, my jaw might as well have dropped to the ground because I wasn't sure if I'd ever even been asked that question by myself. I definitely didn't ask myself that question ever. So again, whether or not other people, and when they did ask me, my answer usually was, I don't know. And that was the truth of the matter for me at that moment. I didn't know because again, I was so disconnected from myself out of protection. I was so used to playing the roles that many of us play. And for me, it was very much showing up in my relationships in service of others to not bother or worry someone else, thinking I was being a good person. And all of the while, that self that I was overstepping was where my intuition was. So the truth of it, I was speaking a very big truth in that moment to myself that I needed to hear, which was that I didn't know. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I wanted, from little matters to what I wanted for dinner. And this might sound crazy for some listening, but really not connected with any of my interests, any of my likes, any of my dislikes. Because again, someone in the comments earlier described us all as humans, and I couldn't agree more, as walking robots. And I was good at it. I was
Right.
good at playing all of those good.
Mhm.
I played all of those roles so seamlessly
Sure,
that,
sure.
like I said, I didn't realize how disconnected I was from who I was because I wasn't ever looking. So the journey, for me was, like I said, coming to the awareness of how disconnected I was and then beginning to walk myself home and discover myself and in terms of as a person. And when I developed the self healers hashtag, right, it's this idea of self healing, though again with the goal being so that who I show up to in my relationships is someone who's whole, who's connected to my intuition, so that I can determine, right, which relationships are ones that I want to continue and pursue because they're resonating with me. I feel safe, namely to continue to be myself in them, or ones that aren't safe or aren't resonating with me. And all of that, begins, in my opinion, when we a discover where we're looking. And a lot of us are again looking in our minds or looking outside of ourselves, maybe even looking to our relationships. And then
Sure.
B, if we are that person, we begin to look within, begin to reconnect, begin to discover who you are, so that as you then begin to or continue to show up in all of the relationships that are probably orbiting around you, you're changing, right? You're doing it differently. And like you and I acknowledge, and a lot of the people here were saying, because you can't change for someone else. You might want your relationship to change. You might want your partner to change or your loved one to change, though the change happens, in my opinion at least, when you change, when you begin to show up and create a new space or container for
Sure.
that relationship. And again, all of that begins full circle with learning yourself, with reconnecting with yourself, with going first on that. So maybe even listeners, well, how connected am I? Right? Just become curious. Go observe yourself. Go live tomorrow and see, right, how connected you feel to the choices that you're making.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't think that is a weird thing to say at all. Earlier, when you said, I didn't even know what my interests and hobbies and stuff were. I mean, I hear that all the time. I'm sure you hear that all the time. It's literally trained out of us by this post-industrial dystopian concrete jungle thing. Um, you know, the man is basically just prepared human beings to be cogs in a wheels for corporations and assembly lines. We don't really reflect anything else greater than that to the corporate oligarchy, if you will. Um, and it's really unfortunate. It and it's almost it, it's so scary easy for a lot of those systems to just continue using divide and conquer tactics when all of this stuff is going on and people are already in a state of panic and hyper arousal and outrage from being exposed to stuff that is so awesomely different from what they're familiar to, and just go back to self-righteousness because we're basically dependent on it to feel comfortable in whatever self-reinforced state of denial that we happen to be in. And it's that part is very sad to watch. But watching you do what you do, and I'm honored that you appreciate the content that I create here. Gives it gives me hope having these kinds of conversations with you.
Same, Logan. And to speak to your point before we get ready to end here, I want to send some compassion out to all of us in humanity, because, like you said, we are in a global world now, and on the one hand, that offers us the opportunity to see a whole spectrum, or to meet or to hear about a whole spectrum of humans that, again, are similar to us and are dissimilar to us, that are living in different beliefs or different lifestyles that might be very resonating with what we think, is the case or should be the case, and a lot that might not be. So the compassion I want to extend is, as universal as we're becoming now, because we have access to the global collective, as I call it, there's a lot of challenge, there's a lot of trauma that's also now coming to the surface because of that visibility, because of that access, because we can all pick up our phone, right, and choose to scroll and go and, subject ourselves to whatever message, we're interested in viewing at that time. And within the presentation of all of these different humans being humans, and again, some of us living out our pain in these different ways now on this global forum, it's a very challenging time as well. So I, like you, tend to focus on the hopeful side of things, on the where we're going side of things. So I also, as always, want to, expand and make space for how challenging, things can also be when you're presented with all of these new ideas, all of these new realities, and for some of us, information that is hard to integrate or to even consider or to even be curious about. So we are on the brink of in my opinion, another kind of global type evolution. We have obviously different circumstances that many of us are living on or around or under, depending on where on the globe that we're living at this time. And again, there is so much hope, in my opinion, and with free resources. I mean, I began that Instagram account 3 years ago without any expectation of what would happen. For me, it was my first place to begin to speak my truth, not to worry, even though I worried a lot about what people
Sure.
would think of me beginning to share my own personal journey, because I was taught as a therapist, you don't do that, and you definitely don't do that online. Absolutely
I'm,
not.
I'm
God
there all the
forbid you
time
then
still,
teach some,
too.
if you teach some things, now you're really going, yeah. So
Sure.
all of this fear was there, though again, I'm forever indebted and grateful for the community that was there receiving the information and shaking their head in resonance, because for me it helped me feel less alone, which I felt very alone at that time as I was coming into all of this information, and all of my relationships were changing. I was really wanting to find my people. So I was able to find them, and I was also able to be exposed to new thoughts and new ideas and humans that were out, on other sides of the world that were thinking these same thoughts. And for me, that was that affirmation and confirmation. And it opened the door for a lot of opportunity then too. So not only to, connect with people like yourself, to have the opportunity to write a book. I mean, these were things I never would have imagined in my little office in Philadelphia. Right. And so there is a lot of hope. There is a lot. This is a tool, a resource, like all things, though, in my opinion. It's how are you using it? Can we learn? So I'm saying all that to say, as humans, we're we're in a learning phase too. We all, I think, need to learn now how to live with this access that we have, with this global humanity that we're evolving into, and all that comes with it. And when I see people like yourself doing what you're doing each and every day, again, I just feel stronger and stronger, grounded in where I'm going, and even ever more hopeful for, in my opinion, where I see us all going. So thank you for being who you are, for shining your light. I can imagine, coming from a very similar system that I came from, the different challenges that you've been and maybe still are navigating. And just thank you, Logan, because it's all of us. And I say this all the time to members in my community, who aren't, maybe putting themselves on where are we at, TikTok lives, or in
What are we
front of
doing?
all these people, not to sell
Yeah.
themselves short, because the ripples
Mm,
that they're causing
mm.
by doing the work themselves are greatly, in my opinion, impacting all of humanity.
We need each other to do the work, and I love the compassion note with the yin, and I want to maybe throw in a little fire note on the yang. Like
Please do.
we need we need y'all to do the work. Um, the more of us that can turn on and turn on those around us, the more influence we all have, and it's going to take all of us doing this together to make this turn around. We're group problem solving machines. It's far from impossible, but it's going to take a little pulling.
That's right. That's right. And I'm here for it. And I thank you for being here for it. And I thank everyone here listening for being here for it. This is how we change the world, in my opinion.
No, I totally agree. If y'all are not following the holistic psychologist, Dr. Nicole LaPera, y'all need to go follow her. Doing great work. Also, Instagram connected through stuff. Very profound presence on Instagram. Not as much on TikTok. Let's go give her some love, and I'll go follow her and get her numbers
Thank
up
you.
in that direction.
Thank you. Same goes. So anyone who's here from my account, if you're not following Logan at Healing Humanity, absolutely give a follow. He does incredible work. So thank you, Logan. It was so great connecting. I'm sure we'll continue to connect on this crazy journey that's called life. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in for my
We'll
first
do
TikTok live. We
it.
did it.
Woo woo.
All right. Have a good rest of your night.
Bye,
Let
doctor.
me try to get off now. We'll see how this goes. I shouldn't talk too soon.
On the
We
top
think we
right,
did
there's
it
the power
somewhere.
button.
I got you. Thanks.